Hello there and welcome to TaAF Talks, the show all about influencing positive change and doing things differently. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Ken.
And along with some guests much more qualified than we are, we want to share some real stories and experiences of making real change happen. Learn together and share some nuggets of wisdom along the way. And ideally we'd like to have a little bit of a laugh too.
Absolutely. So, thank you, Jamie. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between physical activity and mental health. And we've got a very fantastic guest with us. I could have thought of a better word than fantastic.
Think of descriptive words and then go with fantastic. Legendary is where I'd have gone with that.
Yeah, that would have been better. So our guest today is Tim Pattenden. Tim is a performance psychologist and in the last couple of years has developed his own consultancy, Elite for All.
Welcome, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
So, I think what we wanted to do was firstly maybe just give you a chance to tell the thousands and eventually millions of listeners a little bit about yourself and where you're at now and anything you just want people to know about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd only probably add a little bit more to what Ken said. What we're currently working on is a project called Epic for Life. So it's a social enterprise, a not-for-profit social enterprise, all dedicated to helping professionals, leaders and practitioners achieve optimal mental health, emotional well-being and performance. We're very much interested in trying to consult, train and develop these individuals and organisations on how they can put mental health and emotional well-being before performance and achieve performance as a result of that. So we've got a launch event in January. We've got some experts and specialists coming down to do some speaking with that, and we'll have some Q&A panels and just basically kind of start exploring the concept of Epic for Life, really, which is all about empowering people and inspiring change to create generations of emotionally resilient and mentally healthy people. That's our whole objective with it.
Cool. And I'm assuming people can find you easily enough online to check out what it's all about.
Epic for Life, social media, websites, all there, yeah.
Right, wicked. So I think basically some of those things you've talked about now are perfectly lined up for the topics that we wanted to get into today. And just in case listeners have kind of forgotten, Together in Active Future has a real interest in the links between mental well-being and physical activity and how those can support each other and how one can improve, or the opposite of improve, the other.
Yeah, impact.
Yeah, very good. Ken will do nothing better than that today for the rest of this podcast. So, one thing we like to do, Tim, can we just check it's Tim?
Yeah, Tim.
We launched into the Tim bit before checking, so we're happy with Tim, good. One thing we like to do with our guests is something called success factors, which is something we tend to do in TaAF. No matter what we do, we think about what would the person like to, what's success for you for this podcast? What would you like to kind of not get from it, but feel like when you've left the building afterwards?
I think first of all I'd like to feel like I've actually contributed to the conversation in a meaningful way. I think the second thing for me is that I don't want to, I'm not an expert, and perhaps even if I had a doctorate and a PhD, I don't even know whether I would still say I was an expert. But so I don't know everything, but I do feel that I've got enough experience in working with people and trying to help people that specialises me to be able to have an opinion, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I'm gonna paraphrase that, and feel free to come across with opinions based on kind of your experiences and knowledge, but not come across as a know-it-all.
Yeah. That's basically it.
Yeah. I mean, we've met you, we know that's going to happen. The know-it-all in this group is definitely Ken.
Well, true.
Right, magic. So I've captured them on there, and at the end, what we'll do is we'll come back at the end and make sure we feel like we've achieved that together.
Perfect.
So one thing I'm going to very quickly do before we get into the discussion that we want to have first is a couple of, I say facts, and I suppose they are kind of facts, but it's something that just looking into some physical activity and mental wellbeing stuff I wanted to get across. So I think one of the really simple bits was for us around the kind of physical activity bit of the benefits of it. So there's a really obvious ones around the improving mental well-being, helping manage weight, diabetes, all that kind of stuff. But I think one of the interesting things is you can just carry on with it. It helps improve your mood. It can help give you an energy boost. It can help you sleep better. It can boost your sex life. It can be fun. It's a great way to see friends. Apparently it helps the skin and delays the signs of ageing. Ken?
Much needed in my case.
Much needed. Can you believe he's mid-30s? Look at that. It can help your memory. It helps the skin and delays the signs of aging. It can help your memory. So
see what you've done there. I was about to say, reading it again. Lost yourself.
Not just a pretty face. So that was one of those things. The benefits are just overwhelming. And then the next one I like, which is less a fact, but it's nice to remind people. When we talk about physical activity, it encompasses all activities at any intensity performed at any time during the day or night. And I think people getting away from that mindset of sport and intensity is quite helpful in just helping people take that first step, potentially.
Yeah, definitely.
So I just wanted to bring them up as less facts, but something I think it's worth reminding people of. So, if it's okay, I think we'll get into the first theme
definitely.
we wanted to explore, and we'll have a chat, but really looking, Tim, for you to bring some of your experiences and examples, and we'll do what we can to. And I think one of the things we're really interested in is just that first bit I talked about of the reality of how physical activity and mental well-being can help one another, whichever way around you'd like to kind of approach that subject, and what you understand about the benefits of one or the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just open it up for all of our discussion, really.
Yeah, I probably the first thing I would chuck in at this point is that they obviously do mutually benefit each other, and I think what we're seeing now is more and more of a discussion around how it's a whole person approach now, that you can't actually disconnect mental health and physical health, that they go together hand in hand, and really, when we think about it, it's a bit short-sighted on our part that we've not made this connection years and years ago. The brain is an organ, which means it's a physiological functioning part of the body. So if you're physically healthy, then clearly you're going to have positive effects to the mental health, to the psychological functioning. So I think that's an interesting point that we all of a sudden obviously have reached this point of actually it's a why wouldn't they be connected? Of course they're connected. Does that make sense?
No, it does, and I think it's an interesting thing, because it's one of those, isn't it? In the past, it's like, well, of course, the heart's a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the healthier it's been. And actually, the theme you just applied there is, well, of course, the brain is a part of the body; it's an organ in the same way. So, of course, if you're healthier and happier, then the brain is getting that kind of much needed kind of workout and well-being and stuff.
Yeah, I think people have been experiencing it forever. And I think certainly in my own life and many people who I know, this regular sense of exercise, and you feel all of these benefits that we talked about at the beginning in some of those facts, but we've never really professionally put them together, just like you say, Tim, that we've talked about being fit, and we've talked about mental health and how we need to tackle some of the things, and we've had our brain training games on our little Nintendo Switches or whatever it might be, but we never really just talk about well-being being that collective sense of us being well, but that is the hot topic at the moment, and that's what everyone's trying to accomplish, this utopia of wellness for the population.
So just on that, and we're instantly going to digress now and just get into all sorts of stuff, which is interesting for me at least. Because when you were saying there, it's almost like it's almost been a failing on professionals' part and systems' part, and that's part of the word system. I know we hate that. We have a system swear jar, but I suppose it's interesting to understand why that is, and we kind of toy with a theory of it's really interesting that when you are a professional, in whatever term that means, is you almost disconnect that from the person you are outside of that profession, and come back to your point of, well, why haven't we recognised it? Because at home we recognise it. We know that things can help us feel better, and we know that things can impact us in a way that kind of negatively does it. But then you become a profession and you forget that for the person you're trying to support a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one interesting point is that we when we're talking about mental well-being, we talk about mental illness and mental health as if they are the same thing. And in the work that I do, the amount of people that I come across that still don't understand that those two things are completely different topics, they're completely different issues. And I think to give one answer to your question, there's been an absence of a conversation around mental health, but what there hasn't been an absence over, and in fact we're not we talk about it a lot, is mental illness. So we talk about, from a mental well-being point of view, we talk about everything when it goes wrong, and we've educated and we've kind of given people a vocabulary to discuss mental illness, where everybody now correctly or incorrectly diagnoses mental illness. Everybody knows what depression is, everybody knows what anxiety is, and the multiple different types of anxiety disorders that there are. Everybody understands mental illness way more than they do mental health. And so because of this absence of this conversation of mental health, I would suggest that one of the reasons why we've not made the connection between the two is because we're not actually talking about mental health, we're talking about mental illness. Does that make sense? If I ask the question, how do you make sure you're mentally healthy? I think most people, certainly in my experience, struggle to know what to say to that. How do you break mental health down?
I think that's really... I don't think I've ever thought about it quite that way, as you've put it there. Because I think if you asked me 2 minutes ago, what would you describe as mental health, I'd almost describe it as the absence of all these
being
mental...
free from depression and being free from anxiety.
Yeah, but is what you're saying then, Tim, there's maybe a better way? I'm really interested to how you would describe mental health then, as opposed to just the absence of mental illness.
I think that's perfect the way that you described it, that it isn't just the absence of mental illness, and actually what we're talking about. So, for instance, there could be there's one scientific model which I tend to do a lot of work with on mental toughness, which is a personality trait that has constructs within. So the constructs would be confidence, control, challenge, commitment. So within that, what you could say is that our confidence, our self-confidence, or our confidence on an interpersonal basis, or our sense of control over life, or our control over our emotions, our sense of commitment or challenge, all of these things actually contribute to our overall mental toughness. Within that is your mental and emotional resilience. So within that, you've got one area or one framework of where you can have a discussion about, well, what is mental health? Well, mental health could look like I'm really confident in my own abilities. So because I'm confident in my own abilities, I'm not worried or anxious, or I don't get depressed off a bad performance because I know that I'm good and it's just a bad day, etc., etc. And so in that way, as I'm building my confidence, I'm actually taking care of my mental health.
I told you a good idea bringing guests.
Yeah. And it turns out when you said at the beginning they're much cleverer than us, you were right.
Turns out it's true.
You were right.
So I think on that, we're in some of the work we're trying to do in this pilot. Some of it is going to be very much, hopefully, involving people who, by the nature of the fact we knew how to reach them because they are registered with a GP practice with a mental ill health, if you like. So that's the way we've got an in, if you like. But that's purely a way of getting them to come and sit with us. And then what we want to talk about, and I think it's what I've written down here, is almost framing a little bit. Because almost we don't really want to at any point really get into and you've registered with this thing and what is that like too much, versus how can you frame that to get into how have you been in the past when you felt in a really good place and you felt like you're ready to take on a physical activity challenge, you're ready to take on life, and what did that kind of feel like a little bit, versus the framing of, which is interesting because I kind of opened that, but an awful lot of things that I work in the NHS sector is, did you know that if you improve this, it reduces your prevalence or likelihood of getting depression and anxiety, as if that's a motivating factor, as opposed to the framing of, getting out there and doing some stuff can help your mood, can help you sleep better, and actually, when you're ready to do that, you know what I mean? It's that kind of framing thing. I think we're going to be not grappling with, but working out what's the right way of landing an involvement session so that people set off on a really kind of positive foot, but still get into the reality of where they're at now and how they can improve that.
Well, what was really interesting about one of the things you said, Tim, was just picked out a couple of almost like sporty words when you're talking not about sport at all. So my performance wasn't very good, or I just had a bad day, the sort of things we'd talk about in a sporting context, regularly talking about my United, my team, and poor performance, but it's alright, it'll get better in the future, possibly.
Just alienated loads of listeners there. Can
No, well, everyone supports Man United and they agree with my position. It will get better. It can't get much worse. But yesterday was good. But what I'm interested in is how do you? So you're from a sports and performance background. How do you think that some of those lessons within sports and performance relate to, everyday people who are just trying to get this balance of well-being and mental health and physical health? How do you think that connects?
Yeah, I mean, I think to simplify it, you just need to contextualise performance in the circumstances of the person. So the principle for me is the same, whether we're talking about performance on a football pitch or performance for everyday life. Essentially, how well I perceived I've performed that day in whatever I'm doing is my performance. So I think if you keep it that simple, I think that the principles then still apply. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose what's interesting is and perhaps for us to explore further is, we've talked a bit about mental health and that mental toughness and the resilience. How does physical activity feed into that, and how do they connect together from your perspective?
Yeah, physical activity. You go back to the point that we started talking about with it being the whole person approach. If you're, let's say somebody is experiencing anxiety, and again, when we're talking about this concept of performance, it kind of really doesn't matter what the performance is.
Yeah.
So if it's the first day at school, if it's the first day on the job, or if it's not, you've applied for 10 jobs this week and you still haven't been able to get an interview, all of that is performance related. So let's say that these experiences bring anxiety or feelings of anxiety. Physical activity could have a really important part to play in different ways. So just simply going and doing some physical activity could help regulate that sense of anxiety, could help relax the body a little bit, help relax the mind. I love the concept of, I actually don't know whether, I meant to look before we started doing this, whether anybody's doing this, but mindfulness and running together, because running or even walking, mindfulness is just all about being kind of present in the moment. There's a lot of mindfulness experts out there that are shouting at me right now, but what it does come down to is kind of being present in the moment and what's real, and running and walking outdoors would be massive for that. Being connected with nature, if you're going to go and do it with somebody as well, having a running partner, a walking partner, or a walking group. All of these things help you become more present in the moment. And so that can help you then start dealing with those senses of anxious feelings, or even kind of mood irregulation in terms of maybe a distress feeling or depression, etc. So from that point of view, physical activity has a massive impact. But that's without even getting into, and I think you mentioned at the beginning, Jamie, about the hormones that it releases. So it actually has a physiological reaction. It can release more serotonin in the brain, which is going to help with relaxing. It's going to help with sleeping. Sleeping's then going to help relax the body. And I mean, I'm not an expert in terms of the physiology of it all, but certainly, hopefully that gives a little bit of a flavour in terms of what it can do.
And I think I'm paused a little bit, because my one experience of mindfulness, which isn't the proper experience, and more people are going to shout at me now when I do this,
because you definitely don't know what it is.
I definitely don't know what I'm talking about. So, and the combination of doing it outdoors, my one experience of it is somebody getting us all to close our eyes and deep breathe and kind of relax. And when you said it, I just had this thing of people walking outdoors with their eyes shut, breathing deeply, hitting trees all over the place. But I mean, just the one experience I did have of it was that just take some time, think about nothing else, just focus on a thing and just relax and breathe. And just that, something a simple. Most of this stuff is a simple technique, but most of it is usually around give yourself the time to do this stuff, which is something we talk about constantly in TaAF.
Yeah.
Which is people never give themselves time to think about them. Coming back to your point earlier, people never give themselves to think about, that was a good day for me today. I've had a really good day. What was it about today that made today one of the better ones I've had in the past few weeks? You just crack on. And at the end of the week, you never think back and go, Monday I was smashing it. Tuesday something went wrong. What was that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's none of that time to be present, like you've talked about. Think about what's the difference between me on the good day and me on the day that didn't feel as good, and what contributed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly, I was going to say is what you've got. The way we're wired is that we can have anything between 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
So and
You're closer to the 12,000.
I'm delighted you give me 12,000, pal.
and research shows that it could even be in excess of 70, 90,000 for some people. And these things are happening all the time. I like to compare it to Netflix. You know, basically things are always streaming, always running. Netflix at any one time has probably got over 4,000 titles running at any one time, and it's there always in the background. And the brain's the same. The thoughts are just constantly going. But the challenge for all of us is that up to 90-95% of these thoughts are negative, and up to 80% of them are going to be repetitive. So when we're talking about mindfulness, what one of the kind of the benefits of it is that you're trying to get people to be more mindful of the moment and what's actually happening around them. Because if you think about what I've just said about that stream of thinking, those stream of thoughts, it's not hard to get lost. It's not hard to have obsessive thinking. It's not hard to get stuck like a record and just be in the moment of thinking about the same thing over and over and over again. And we've all experienced that in one way or another. But the kind of the general concept, or the loosest concept of mindfulness, is about, can we bring ourselves back in the moment? But I mean, that's only one strand of mental health and well-being.
But even, and let's not, like I said, this podcast will be 8 hours. We're kind of with this thing, but we've almost designed everything around us to get us out of that. So, the fact we designed contraptions to hold in our hands that ping, we designed an email system that makes a noise when something arrives, like we had on the last podcast when Ken didn't turn his notifications off.
Yeah.
We have a culture.
I did apologise for that.
We have a culture of it's fine to interrupt. You know what I mean? Everything we do is about interjecting in that space in between your two ears, isn't it? We don't have. You're almost going to create an environment where you can be present.
Well, we've almost mirrored our mind in that way. That's what we've done.
It's chaos in here.
Yeah.
I'm going to surround myself with the chaos out
and the
there.
mind is constantly trying to feed disruption, but the problem is that a lot of the time it's negative disruption.
And what's so hard, I think, when you're trying to be active and physically active, is make me plan tonight. All right, I'm going to get up half an hour early and I'm going to go for my run or my walk. Probably a walk in my case. Jog, possibly for some of it. But you wake up and instantly your mind starts going of, I want to go for a run. Well, I'm just going to check my emails and I'll see what's on BBC News. And one of the kids has woke up early. I could probably still go, but I can't find my trainers. And those are just some of those thousands of thoughts that happen, and before you know it, that moment's gone. And it's really hard for people, I think, or certainly I've found it hard for people to build any kind of consistency, because there's just so, I was going to say my mind's so full. I'm probably more at the 12,000 end as well rather than the 70,000, but there's so much stuff going on in our lives, or we say that, but it's really so much stuff is going on in our minds that it's hard to focus on any one particular thing, and so you end up doing a bitty job of kind of everything because you're constantly distracted from what you really want to achieve. I think that's one of the real challenges for me, and some of that relation between mental well-being, or the psychology of it, and being physically active, is it's hard to focus and to achieve a goal on a consistent basis. And that's not just physical activity, it could be anything. And maybe this is a bit of my issue in terms of being consistent and this sense of self-mastery and be able to override all these distracting thoughts. I find that really difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about 2 psychological skills in what you've just said, attentional focus and goal setting. They're 2 psychological skills. The challenge that we've got with psychological skills often is that everybody thinks they know everything about, so we can have a conversation about goal setting and everyone's got an opinion on it. But how does that actually relate to us on a psychological basis, and how is that a psychological skill, and how do we use it to our advantage, and the same with focus. How do you actually train focus? And Jamie, you kind of mentioned before about almost kind of that meditation approach where you're closing your eyes, and actually there is incredible power in what we would call, certainly in sports psychology, in imagery, in terms of actually mentally rehearsing scenarios and playing them out so that you've lived them several times before you actually go and live them in reality. So, I mean, I won't go too far down that road, but what you're kind of highlighting, Ken, is that we have generally in society, this is personal opinion, this is just Tim speaking.
It's coming to me a bombshell now, everyone.
we have a very we've not been educated in our education system on emotional intelligence. We've not been developed on a psychological skill basis. We've been developed intellectually. We've been developed physically. Even socially, maybe to a certain extent. But that not in any. Certainly, when I was in school, and I'm probably a little bit older than you guys, but there was no education around emotional intelligence, psychological development. When was the first time you probably heard about goal setting? It was probably when you went to work, in terms of how you understand it.
Yeah.
But actually, these are key cognitive skills that help us develop mental well-being and optimal mental health.
And so maybe that's really interesting. And as we talk about this population, or this group of people within our society and within our communities who might be struggling to be physically active, me being one of them, if a lot of it is to do with a lack of psychological skills, and perhaps this is the last little bit we'll touch on for this section, what can we do about that? How can we take these thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe the whole of our society might be lacking some of these psychological skills, and that may be a bit generalistic. What can we collectively as organisations and as this idea of the system, what can we possibly hope to do about that?
Well, it is happening at a very slow pace. So you've got the English education system are starting to bring in mental and emotional well-being as part of the curriculum. Ofsted have certainly changed their criteria to include it. The Welsh education system are launching a new curriculum where emotional and mental health and well-being is actually one of their key areas of learning and experience now, so it's part of their core curriculum. And so the education system's starting to move a change. You've had some big independent reviews over the last few years where they've been calling for proactive action instead of reactive action, because basically the NHS, the education systems, they can't cope with the prevalence of mental illness, so they've had to move to proactive solutions. So it is happening, and it is starting to move forward. And also what people are starting to really wake up to is that we don't have to just accept the fact that people get mentally ill. We can actually try and prevent it, and we can be proactive. But on the other side of that, certainly from the early 90s, you've got this kind of positive psychology movement where actually we can help people thrive in life regardless of the circumstances by going in and doing more emotional intelligence training, more psychological skill training, etc. So there's a bit of a long-winded way of coming round to saying it is happening. The answer to the question is that people just need to start including it in what they're doing. Whether it's, I know we're going to talk about this later, but whether it's businesses, education, schools, colleges, universities, public sector, whatever the organisation is, they just need to start including this type of training and development into what they do and into their strategies.
And I think just final point from me, I think it's, and come back to your point, which is a lovely way to do it, is it's starting to happen. The opportunity that we've been given by Sport England to allow us to focus a pilot on physical activity, but actually wrap mental well-being around that and almost be given licence to work out how we can do that is a step taken by a big national organisation to try and work this out. Us trying to do a podcast and bring people like Tim in, which helps us so that when we go and interact out, we're doing something better than we would have done before we kind of got into that space.
Yeah.
I think everybody just taking a little bit of personal responsibility to say what's the best I can be in that situation that helps the well-being of me and that person. I think all of those things are kind of slowly coming to the fore, aren't they? I think it's a nice framing of it. It's starting to happen.
Yeah,
maybe we just kick up the arse a little bit.
And I think you make a great point. I think the point is that we're having the conversation. That's the first. That's how we got to where we've got to with mental illness. Everybody started having the conversation. So we've started having the conversation. People are starting now to take action. But like you said, now it's a case of a really quick example, a school that's got a certain budget and they've got staff leaving in droves and they can't keep them because of their stress, work-related stress and mental health, etc. At some point, that the person that's in charge of the finances has got to say, let's use some of that budget to actually develop the staff from an emotional intelligence point of view so that we can prevent work-related stress causing the problems that it's causing. And same with the NHS. Exactly the same challenge with the NHS.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Right, we're going to pause briefly from that conversation, and one of our features...
Feature time.
To take that kind of really interesting conversation and just pause for a moment, we're going to
make it something totally different.
We're going to introduce our Pennine quickfire questions. We've got 9 questions for you, and this is how it works. This is for, I think, our listeners to get to know a bit more about you. And
in a really random way, though.
Yeah, we're hoping it'll be fun. We'll see. Okay. So a timer's going to start, and we're going to ask you 9 questions. You just got to answer as quick as you can, first thing that comes into your head, without embarrassing yourself too much.
No, embarrass away. But if anything sounds proper interesting, I'm going to pause it and ask you about it, okay?
Okay.
Right, let's get the timer on. Bit of pressure now.
Okay. Ready?
Ready.
All right.
Away.
Tim, what is your nickname?
I don't really have one. Just Tim.
Never in your life?
I tried to get TJ to stick for a while, but no one was having it.
Is J your last name?
Yeah, John. Yeah.
There you go.
Middle name's John. Yeah.
You'll be TJ to us from now on.
Which Harry Potter character are you most like?
I'd say Ron Weasley, and that's not just because I used to have red hair.
What do you mean used to? Okay, one thing that annoys you.
Disloyalty.
And one thing that makes your heart glad.
My family.
How long does it take to get ready in the morning?
My family aren't going to listen, are they? It could take a couple of hours.
Whoa! We are pausing that. Tim, I mean, make it shorter, but take me through a 2-hour process of getting ready. I mean, you look good, sir, but I'm going to be
not that
not
good.
2 hours good.
To be honest, it's more to do with kind of, I do a lot of kind of psychological kind of work. So I'll do a vision board. I will do exercise. Wow. I'll do affirmation statements. I like to read in the morning. I like to spend a little bit of time with my family, so we'll do a bit of reading in the family. But I feel like, but I also do take a while in the bathroom.
I loved the way that you've just... I mean, firstly, you made me feel bad about going... but I'm glad I did, because I don't think I've ever thought of answering the question, how long does it take to get ready, with a view to ready for the rest of the day includes spending time with people, reading, relaxing, getting into that space, versus... rushing to do with spiky hair and walking out the door. So your answer...
With a piece of toast in your hand.
Yeah, exactly.
But it can be quite stressful. You made the point earlier, Ken, but it can be quite stressful. I have to do all those things. So that's why my answer is probably so natural. Okay, I'm going to carry on. 2 hours though, everybody. Wow. Let's go.
Run, walk, cycle, or something else?
Well, I'd have to say football.
Okay. Qualifications or experience?
Experience.
If there's a spider in your house, do you kill it or set it free?
It depends on my mood.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to Mariah Carey?
Well, if it's Mariah Carey, 0. But yeah, I'm alright. 5.
Ooh,
5.
There you go.
And as a follow-up, what's your...
Still got the pressure on?
If you want.
Yeah, go on.
What's your karaoke song of choice?
It'd have to be something by Gary Barlow.
Nice.
Very nice. I always feel the need to get the guest to give us a bar or two, but that's too much.
No.
You have got in your bio, though, that you're a pretty good guitarist, is that right?
At my own songs. I'm an expert at my own songs.
You could play as an original if you wanted to. We have got a guitar.
Are we going to ask the other question?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Go for it.
We've got our final question, which we've told is too controversial to ask, but is Ken or Jamie?
Well, I know Ken, so Ken.
Oh, finally, though, you've got one on the board.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There you go. He's very happy we did that question.
It's like 18-1 now.
Brilliant. Today we've got to know Tim a little bit better. I know what's sticking out in everybody's mind is the one thing to remember from that. It's a 2-hour get ready time.
I'm really keen on what an affirmation statement is as well. I like that. I think I know what it is. But
there's too many podcasts worth of stuff coming out of Tim right now. I think we've got
we'll
podcast 2 and 3. We'll bring him back. So I think what we wanted to get into now, and I think it's a beautiful segue from some of the stuff you've talked about now, is we're going to touch a little bit now on the impact of life events on both things that we're interested in, which is mental well-being and physical activity. And because in Together an Active Future, we're quite interested in life events you mentioned, such as changing schools or starting school or losing your job or having a child for the first time, the impacts that those can have. Because we're interested in understanding, can something more be done by a system wrapped around people that can help mitigate some of the potential adverse impacts of those, and also getting a little bit into the reality of behaviour change and how you can break out of some of that kind of stuff. And if we have time, maybe a little bit on the role of business and public sector too. So there's quite a lot in there, but so let's whistle through it and get some really effective stuff out of that. So I think a little bit around the impact of life events. And maybe your experience, Tim, of if you've worked in a particular area of certain life events and your experiences of seeing some of the impacts on that, and maybe even seeing how people have addressed it and come out of the other side of those things.
You've mentioned quite a lot of the common ones, so there was one that I wanted to kind of bring up in this, which might not be something that's that common to talk about, which is the transition from childhood to adulthood. Now, I know we kind of know all of what that's about, but actually, if people stop and think about what that impact that has on a psychological basis, specifically if we go back to the physical activity point of view, so if we stay with people that predominantly were quite physically active when they were younger, so I'm going to go quite personal with this. So when I was younger, I was very physically active and played a lot of football, was in all the school teams, did a lot of athletics, and then as I got older, what happened is everything else started to change around me, including my body, but I didn't change, and I didn't transist from wanting to just play football all day every day to then needing to have a family, provide for a family, get a job, have a career, get educated, etc., etc. And actually, that example I think exists in different levels on different scales for many, many people. That transition from I'm a child who can do whatever he wants or she wants whenever they want, to now all of a sudden I've got to take on responsibility. I've got no choice, I have to take on responsibility. Every decision I make has got a consequence, and actually all of a sudden life is going to chuck things at me that I can't cope with or can't deal with. And I think, again, when we come back to a little bit about that emotional intelligence development, how have we prepared people for that? How have we helped people with that? And when you're talking about physical activity, from a psychological point of view, people go from being, a large part of society go from being active, and some of them, quite a lot of them, very physically active, to all of a sudden being inactive. And for me, there is an issue in that transition. How have we helped people manage that transition? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that has really struck me, I've got 5 young children. I think you've got 5 children as well, Tim.
Yeah.
Just one, in case anyone thinks about me. Just one.
Well, it's not as good of an effort as 5, but you've tried your best.
Yours would struggle in the 5-side tournament.
But humans are born and they move naturally, and they move about and they're active, and actually it's really hard to make them be still. But there's something about our society and our culture where very quickly we almost try to train out of people that natural inclination to be active, the sit still, stop fidgeting. We go and work in offices where we sit down, we go to school and sit down for long portions of the day. And I think you're right that what we're doing is trying to get people to do something that is unnatural. And I think that maybe then has impacts on your mental well-being, that I'm being put in circumstances here which is unnatural, that I'm not prepared for, that I don't know anything about, and that then messes up our psychological well-being, and equally then we're not trained or prepared on how to deal with that disruption psychologically either. And I've just seen it with my 2 girls who have gone to high school. It's massively different from primary school and the level of physical activity and opportunities you have to be active in primary school and as pre-teens, if you like, through to being teenagers, where you have to really look for the opportunities to be active rather than just be naturally active. So I really see kind of what you've talked about there playing out in my life and my family's life as well.
And people will take the opportunity away from your children at some point. That's the other key thing. So we're engaged in physical activity all the way up until kind of early adulthood, and then it's up to us. Up until that point, the opportunity's been thrown at us, but now all of a sudden we've got and also the opportunity's been thrown at us more so through organised sport than it has anything else. Whereas in reality, what we need is a habit of physical activity, so walking, running, etc. But all of a sudden we've got to develop that ourselves, but we've spent the last 18, 19, 20 years not doing that.
Yeah, I'm playing football at school with my 10 mates and the other 11 people who want to play, and all of a sudden I'm 20 and I ain't got no one to play with.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult then to...
I mean, my own personal nature makes me go, when I hear stuff like this, it always upsets me to a point of when you said, I had all of this, I can do what I want, I can play football whenever I want, and then that gets taken away from me. And actually I need to change, but I don't know how to, because nobody's really helped me understand the reality of that will go, because you don't want to have that chat with kids. Yeah. Are you having fun now? Good. That will go away. It's my job to prepare you for the cruel, harsh world of these things. But I think what I'd like to get into a little bit, because anything that kind of sounds bleak makes me feel a bit sad.
Yeah.
And actually it's all around, that's great. The fact that we recognise that is great. And when you talked about it, so then what you're in is you need to develop a habit that you used to have because it was natural. Then things got in the way that make it not natural anymore, and then you've got to work out how to come up with the new habit, whatever that would be, to help you get back into it. So I think I'd be interested in having a chat now about what practical steps have we done as ourselves, or have we seen with people, where people just need to start taking those first practical steps into forming new habits.
Or remembering the old ones.
Or remembering the old ones and remembering that you used to do stuff that was fun and you enjoyed in the past.
I mean, in some ways what you're talking about is to what extent do people feel that they've got control over their own life? So when you're talking about mental toughness, there's one element of that which is to do with life control. And what you can often see is that there's a very low score. If you do a personality test, a psychometric test, you can see a low score within life control because people feel that life happens to them rather than they happen to life. So when you're talking about how do we get people to kind of form habits, how do we get people to basically take control of their own life, again, that's where we're talking about emotional intelligence development, psychological skill development. How much does somebody feel that the opportunity has been taken away from them, as opposed to actually that opportunity is no longer there, so I'm going to go and create my own opportunity, or I'm going to go and do it in this way. And this is where I'm talking about, it's that transition period and that complete lack of education in terms of how people can actually have more control over their own life. And I think another really, when we're talking about life events, which I think is really important to kind of put into this conversation, is, again, this is Tim speaking, as a society we seem to be chasing a comfortable life. We don't like anything that's adverse. So anything that makes our life difficult, we see that as bad and horrific. But actually, in reality, adversity is what makes us strong. It's what makes us powerful human beings. And it's what gives us that sense of life control when we've overcome that adversity, that life happened to me, but I took control of it and I dealt with it. And I think, again, there's a whole piece around there where, what are we saying to each other? What are we saying to ourselves? Are we saying it's good to have an easy life? Or are we actually saying it's not always nice to have a hard life, but it's good for us to have a difficult life?
What a great perspective.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Bring on challenging life.
Yeah.
It's going to make me stronger.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit of just, you can think about your own personal experiences as whether it's in your profession, in your personal life. It's usually the things that have happened to you that knocked you for six, or that forced you to address something, or forced you to face up to something that was scary. that you look back on now and you think, that's the thing that formed the person I am now. That's the bit, you know, from a personal perspective. Now I feel like I can stand up in front of hundreds of people and talk and be cool with that. But it would have taken it's taken a few dodgy experiences in the past, and times when I forced myself to go out there and overcome a fear and have a bad experience and deal with it badly, but recognise that gets you to that point. And I think it's a tough thing to hear, isn't it? Adversity is the thing that makes you stronger.
Yeah.
So don't be worried about bad things happening, it's going to.
And our relationship with mistakes. You know, how many people hate failure to the point where it makes them unwell? You know, I don't want to fail, and I don't want to... I want to succeed. But actually, in reality, you're going to fail more in life than you're ever going to succeed. So if you don't learn to love failure, then you're knackered.
Give me some harsh life lessons here, Tim. I'm not sure I'm ready for any of these things.
Fortunately, I don't ever make any mistakes, so I'm all right.
So I'm gonna see if I can get us a little. So there might not be an answer to this, Tim. So tell me, Jamie, you're looking for something that doesn't exist. Because what I'm really keen on is so let's pick an example or scenario of a person who. Let's use you as an example. If you have that personal journey of, I used to be in this place, and then things have happened to me, and now I'm no longer in that place. And I feel like I want to be, but I don't know what the first step is that's going to give me the best chance of moving into a different space.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by. I'm assuming there's not one answer to that, but what are examples of where somebody's taken that practical step is usually a really good step for people on the journey to doing something better for themselves.
Yeah, what things can they do? Like some practical bits and pieces.
And there might not be an answer, I don't know, it might be a really tough question, but it feels like if I'm sat there thinking, so for example, going back to that bit of having a really simple target in mind, or recognising you used to do stuff and thinking about the time of,
There's a really powerful first step that you can take, and you can make it as practical as you want and be as innovative as you want with it. But that is basically raising people's self-awareness. The gateway to emotional intelligence development, the gateway to developing psychological skills is actually becoming more self-aware. And the biggest challenge that people have in terms of achieving optimal mental health and changing their behaviour is lack of awareness. Lack of awareness of their current position, their current reality, and where they want to be. And I think the other quick thing I would add on to that is too many times we talk about needing to get to here, we need to have this goal. I want to go to the gym because I've got to lose weight. Actually, for most people, that is not going to motivate anybody. The reality is we need to give ourselves a vision, a much bigger vision of where we want to get to in life, that's going to pull us through the adversity, that's going to pull us through the behaviour change and the discomfort that we feel as a result of that, because we've got this bigger picture, we've got this big vision to aim towards. So I think for me that they'd probably be the starting places I would start with anybody, is how aware are people of their actual situation, and can we make them more aware? And then what is their ultimate vision? Where do they want to get to? What's their big picture? And then in between that, you can then start putting in different steps, do different training, etc., etc.
And I've heard you talk about this idea of being pushed versus being pulled in terms of vision before. And picture myself lying in bed in the morning, and the idea of being pushed out of bed by things you've got to do is not very inspiring, and it means it takes a long time to get out of bed. But this idea of being pulled out by something that you love and that you really know that you enjoy and you love and you want to achieve with your life, and that can be small or large. And you talked about vision boards and affirmation statements when you were talking about your 2 hour you must get up
morning
early.
routine.
Or you get up really late after the kids have already gone to school, and then you've got your 2 hours to get ready. I don't know, but this sense of creating a vision of what you want your life to be like in the long term, or the things, perhaps not what life would be like, but what things are important to you, the things that pull you towards them as opposed to pushing you from behind, I think is really interesting. When you talk about that self-awareness, there's something around, isn't there, trying to capture diaries or journals of the things that have influenced you in today, and why did I make those decisions, and that almost that reflective process of thinking about, well, why am I behaving the way that I did? How can I interrupt that? How can I interrupt some of those thoughts that we talked about before? How can I be more focused? And what am I aiming for? Are two, I think, really good tips that I've found really useful in my life, just in terms of trying to, that sense of reflection, and then big targets, because they're going for let's go for a run tomorrow for no other purpose than I feel like I should go for a run. It turns out that never ever works for me. Every morning it doesn't happen. I set that goal every night, it never happens in the morning, so that's not enough of a thing to motivate me to change.
People need a why. They need a why. I've worked with over 60,000 people over the last 14 years who are unemployed, and one of the biggest challenges that they face is the monotony and the sense of being trapped in a life that they, one, never wanted for themselves, and two, sometimes don't feel that they gave themselves. They feel that they've inherited it, and whether that's true or not is almost irrelevant. What matters is that they find a why. So why am I in this situation, and where's it going to take me? And if you can give people a why in terms of raising their self-awareness and then giving them a vision to aim for, it's exactly what you just talked about. All of a sudden people find themselves being pushed towards behaviour change rather than being pulled towards it. And being pushed towards behaviour change is sustainable. Being pulled towards behaviour change is unsustainable. It won't last. Sorry, the other way around. I
was going to say, hope people don't remember the way I described it.
No.
Definitely the opposite to what you said.
Yeah, the opposite. Yeah, being pulled is sustainable, but being pushed, forcing something to happen and pushing it to happen is never sustainable.
I'm glad you corrected yourself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, me too.
I was writing a note which means I missed it, and Ken would have been too polite to say it, and we'd have had thousands of people being pushed towards behaviour change.
Millions of people texting in saying totally contradicting each other.
Who's this idiot?
So, I mean, personally, I think we could go on all day because I think it's fascinating. And
really
I think, do we want to cover one more point around the role of business and public sector, but do it quite succinctly?
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of wrap it up. I think.
Yeah,
so I think one thing, because what we're really interested in, so most of the stuff we've talked about here is about the individual, the people, and people in business are still those people. But actually, what I think we want to touch on now for just maybe a couple of minutes or so is the role of business, the role of the public sector in helping people towards some of the stuff that we've talked about, in creating better wraparounds, creating better structures, creating better motivations for people to actually want to do more.
Yeah.
So I think firstly, what are our experiences of the role that business can play, and what? Let's explore some of those practical steps that businesses are starting to make or could make in the long term. So we're going to be working with some big organisations in this pilot, aren't we?
Yeah.
One simple thing is they could actually start identifying what people's personalities really are when it comes to mental toughness, for instance. You can assess mental toughness and you can assess where people's vulnerabilities are, and it isn't hard to do. There are businesses and universities around the world now that are using mental toughness assessments to actually identify where potential mental health vulnerabilities lie, where their potential vulnerabilities to stress lie, and then they're putting support packages in as a result of that. And I think the key thing is that it's all individual. We all have our own personalities, but what we can do is we can identify where there's some common trends, and the assessments allow that to happen. So I think that's one thing that you can do, whether you use an assessment or not. The point is know your people, know where the vulnerabilities are to stress, to mental health, and then actually put some support packages in place. I think for too long we've lived in a society where if you can't cope, then you're obviously not good enough at your job. And I think I like to use the example of a footballer who's playing for a football club, and they're clearly good. They're clearly a good footballer because they're now professional, right? But then all of a sudden the stress of life hits them, fans, media, sponsorships, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on. And the stress of it all just hits them. Does that all of a sudden mean that they're no good at football? Does that all of a sudden mean that they're not a good footballer? Well, no, it doesn't. What it does mean is that there's some other things going on in their life that are causing a decrement to performance. And I think that the world of business and any other sector, what they need to wake up and realise is that it's not about because somebody's suffering with stress or poor mental health or they've not got enough emotional intelligence development, that they're all of a sudden no good at what they do. Actually, it's nothing to do with that. It's actually to do with that they need some support in coping with these external factors.
I think that's a really interesting insight, and I'm glad that you went there in terms of focusing on that real individual, concept of thinking about our people and the people who work within these businesses and organisations. I was thinking at the total other end of the spectrum when you asked that question around, I think organisations, businesses, these big structures like the NHS need to think about, out of all of our processes and procedures and policies and the way that we do things, which of those are bridges helping people to move forward or across challenges, and which of them really are like cages and keeping people confined and not being able to be themselves and express themselves and be creative and find solutions, but are causing people to be trapped. Not only people who we're working with in the population, but employees too, breaking it down to that individual level. What are we doing within our organisations that are actually making it harder for people to be well rather than easier? And there's and they can be small, from having 6-hour meetings where everyone sits down the whole time, to the big stuff around the way that we organise ourselves and our policies around flexible working or whatever it might be. So I think I like that idea of kind of bridges and I don't know what I said before now. Cages.
It was beautiful when you said it the first time. Yeah. You spoilt it a little bit by trying to do it again then. But, and we don't edit stuff, which is great, so people remember that.
Stacked it.
I think I'll offer one bit for this, and I think we'll kind of wrap it up, because I think what you two just said there is beautiful. I think the interesting bit for me in my limited experience working in it is these businesses, organisations kind of need to believe in it as well. So I've quite a lot of experience of people saying, well, this is the wellbeing check that we do with our staff, and this is what we do in one-to-ones. And you'll ask a really simple question, you'll say, and do you do that as senior management? Do you sit there and reflect a little bit on yourselves? And no, we just do this to our staff. And there's almost this bit of, well, you're not really believing in wellbeing then. What you're doing is ticking a box to say that we care about our staff. And actually, if you really believed about well-being, you'd reflect on, yourself as a person in the role that you're doing. You'd reflect on your managers and the people who work in your teams. Come back to your point, you'd reflect on other things you're doing, giving bridges to people to help them move forward on that journey of well-being, versus actually, doing the opposite. And I think belief is a biggie. Now, whether or not you have to give people ulterior motives to believe in it. So, if you can prove to people that reduce stress, reduces days off, helps business, that's great. If businesses can believe that happier staff in better places produce better products, have better customer relationships, and that's another kind of selling factor, isn't it? But all too often, particularly in the public sector, I think it's kind of understood, and they put processes in place, but maybe don't commit to believe in it in the same way they do for some of the other stuff that we're very good at, such as governance and health and safety and risk and all that kind of stuff.
But key to what you just said, they understand all that other stuff. That's why.
Yeah.
And key to what you just said is that, and you literally just said it, is whether they understand it enough. They don't understand it enough. So how can they believe in something that they don't understand enough? And it comes back to what we talked about already today. We haven't had that emotional intelligence upbringing, that development, and it isn't there in our society. And for me, I think you're absolutely at the nail on the head. How can they believe in it? They don't believe in it, and it's because they don't understand it.
Fab.
High five to you, great insight.
Well, I think, to be fair, Tim made that better than the point that I made.
Much better.
We're bringing Tim back again in the future.
I think we've covered loads there.
I think we have, yeah, and it's probably a couple of podcasts worth, but I think it felt like really rich stuff, and our own success factors are the stuff that we learn stuff and have new insight. I think we've certainly got that, Tim, so thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to review the success factors that you gave us at the start, and we're going to, between us, decide on whether or not we managed to achieve it. So you wanted to feel like you'd actually contributed towards learning and towards the podcast. Ken, what do you think?
I think from Tim's perspective, smashed it.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, awesome.
So, it was only a joke, of course, you have, and it was, to be honest, there's some fascinating stuff in that we could have gone on for ages. And I think you wanted to come across as somebody who has insight and experiences that can offer something, and somebody who also doesn't want to come across as if they know everything and they are the everything. And I think it felt like that all the way through that. I think this was you saying, this is my thing, but, what are yours? We had a chance to share as well, and I think it was a general good offering. And
I mean, you sounded pretty expert to me, mate, to be fair.
We are not the barometers, though, are we?
No, we're setting a low bar, but you sounded pretty expert from my
so thank you, Tim. I think that's been absolutely brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So I think the main thing to do now is we'll sign off. Yeah. And as we always like to do, we'll ask Tim to have the final word for the podcast. So what we'd like to do, sorry, stop making noises and clapping, Jamie. So thank you all very much to our listeners for spending the time with us. If you thought that this was any good, it would be awesome if you could tell people about it. Share the link, share the love, and click to subscribe even to future podcasts. Feel free to have your say. You can find us on Twitter at TaAF Talks and tweet away. But from me and from Ken, I'd just like to say thank you all for listening. Thank you very much for Tim, and we'll hand over for Tim to kind of leave us with his final thoughts.
Okay. My favourite quote is from Mary Ann Williamson. She said it in 1992. She said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are weak." I'm going to paraphrase this, by the way. "Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." Me personally, and the reason why I love what I do, I genuinely believe that we can stop people being okay with just struggling in life. I genuinely believe that we can put a stop to people aiming to just about coping with life. And I genuinely believe, and this is kind of my mission, if you like, that we can help people create a mind that can thrive in life regardless of the circumstances, or even because of the circumstances. And my goal is to try and create generations of emotionally resilient and mentally healthy people for life. That's where I'm at.